Welcome back. I was in Linville Gorge in North Carolina. It was really nice. Let me get this thing fired up here. Welcome to the kickoff of the church's summer series. For those of you unfamiliar with it, the new members and just the visitors, every summer our minister gets a couple months to recharge his batteries or her batteries, and we, the worship team, takes over, and we try to get a good series going for the church to enjoy. We have about 7 talks this summer. The theme this summer, as you might have read, is Celebrating and Sustaining the Earth. We got a great group of speakers, both from the congregation and invited guests. I think you'll be informed and entertained by this summer's offerings. I'm proud to be part of the worship team that developed this series, which includes our minister, Peter Racine, Sharon Scholl, Hope Clayton, and Penny Reed. Thanks, guys. So my title that I sent out, I was asked for a title, was, actually I was told to make the sermon today. My title was Reflections of an Aspiring Environmentalist. So after some reflection, I have retitled it Confessions of a Failed Environmentalist. I'm trying. All right, hang with me. In the early 1960s, my father, who was a Marine engineer officer, was ordered to, he's a Marine, he's ordered. He was transferred to a base in Albany, Georgia. I was a little kid then, and of course the whole family went with him, fortunately. This was before the Vietnam War had really gotten big, and the base was a supply base, so there weren't shooting going on, there were just boxes. It was a great place to grow up for a kid. We could go anywhere we wanted, except where the big sign said no entry, and we probably went there too. The place that drew us was a pine plantation. If you're not familiar with them, after the trees are all cut down, people come back and plant trees, in this case pine trees, in rows so that they can grow up and turn into paper or something later on. So we would go out and play in this pine plantation, which had signs around it saying these are slash pines and when they were planted, and the Marines do a really good job of putting things in straight lines. But we kids had fun. Boys are boys, you know, let's go chop a tree down or let's go do this, that, or the other thing. One day we reached the far edge of this plantation. I think it was maybe 20 miles. In retrospect, it was probably half a mile, but you know, kids. We reached the edge of the plantation, and on the other side of a kind of a meadow was a stand of trees unlike these pine trees. It was a grove of what today we would call old growth. So, of course, being boys, we went in there and started walking through this wonderful place with big longleaf pine and deciduous trees and trees that had fallen down in that low undergrowth you find in an old growth forest. The light was beautiful. You know, it was really neat. There were critters in there too, including a rattlesnake. And we were looking around, and one of us said, probably 5 or 6 boys, "What is this place? What do we call it?" And foretelling the English major he would become, my older brother said, "Paradise." So that's what it was called. Let's get together at Paradise. We'd skip the plantation and head on over to Paradise and play there. It was so different from all the other cultivated property that we experienced on the base. Of course, we couldn't remain there all the time. We had to rejoin the world. So in the world, here are 5 issues to consider as aspiring environmentalists. I'll get back to Paradise. I got the 5 issues here: conservation, chemicals, diet, recycling, and population. There's 2 types of conservation I would like to touch on. The first is preserving, as the Sierra Club says, the wild places. We just talked about wild places. We've planted, plowed, and built on wildlife's habitats to an alarming degree. As you can see in this photo, perspective is important. Are the deers invading our property, or are we cutting roads through their homeland? We need to consider wildlife migration patterns as well as wildlife habitat so they can have their own property back intact. Now, the other type of conservation is that of natural and other resources. Okay, full disclosure, I'm a car nut. I like driving cars, I like fast cars, I like fun cars, I like neat things in cars, I like working on cars, but I'm also a fuel efficient guy. In the late 60s and 70s, I wanted a fuel efficient car when my father said, I'll buy you a car to go to college. Well, the only really efficient cars in those days were foreign-made cars. And my father drew the line there. He was going to buy an American car for me. So he did. And my first car was a station wagon. It got 15 miles to a gallon and leaked oil like the Exxon Valdez. The oil leak wasn't my father's fault. But with time, I established my minimum of 25 miles to a gallon, and then I raised that to 35 miles to a gallon. Still with cars that had fair performance. And I even had a 50 mile per gallon car and would have had a more efficient vehicle today if a person on a cell phone hadn't crunched our car a couple of years ago. It's okay, no one was hurt. The 50 mile per gallon car was very useful when I lived 25 miles from my job. My job was Navy helicopter pilot. My helicopter used 160 gallons an hour. Aspiring or failing? As far as saving the Earth goes, when we consider emissions and other attacks on the environment, the carbon footprint of an electric car, at least according to one graph, is much, much lower over time than in internal combustion cars. At about 25,000 miles, I think it's 40,000 kilometers, the ramp starts up for the use that in our internal combustion cars, and it kind of flattens out. People say electric cars, full-on electric cars, are more damaging to the environment, but you can see downstream or down the road, they're a little better. I would guess that a hybrid falls somewhere in between these two curves. Well, to my credit, I insulated our 100-year-old house. I installed water-conserving shower heads, and mostly the shower heads because I like to take long showers, and I feel guilty using a full flow shower head. So the United States, with an eye towards conservation in 1970, decided to establish the first Earth Day. Remember that? Remember that? It was funded in part by the United Auto Workers, and I can't remember why. Now, originally, the date they thought would be March 21st, which is around the spring equinox. But like everything, it got changed. So now it's April 20 and remains April 20, which means that my birthday, March 21st, can be reflected celebrating the spring equinox. Thank you. Our president in 1970, Richard Nixon, even got into the act by planting a tree on that first Earth Day with his wife, Tricia. Later on, that year, very early that year, he proposed and Congress passed in a bipartisan vote, whatever that is, the act creating the Environmental Protection Agency. Democrats were not the only environmental stewards. Now back in the 70s, CarNet land here, cars had large engines, poor performance, and terrible fuel mileage. But people's desires, legislation, and regulation led to cars that have small engines that are powerful and fuel efficient. This is due to the regulations inspiring us to make that, and then the engineers and the smart people figuring out how to bring that to fruition. When those first regulations were put into effect, people moaned that it was the end of the world, but somehow we overcame that. All right, conservation's over. Chemicals. Back to the 1960s. Rachel Carson, remember her? Yeah. She wrote the book Silent Spring. My first exposure to Silent Spring was in the late 60s when I was at Boy Scout camp. And one of the adult advisors for merit badges, and it was Nature Merit Badge, he wore a beret and he smoked weird cigarettes. I don't know. And he had a beard. He talked about Silent Spring and the destruction of the environment and the problems with forever chemicals. We still have a problem with forever chemicals. But the forever chemicals in those days were getting into the food chain. And who's at the top of the food chain? Us. So we're eating the things that eat the things that eat the bugs. And these chemicals build up in the food chain, and among them are DDT and other chlorinated hydrocarbons. She predicted a bleak future, silent spring, no birds singing when the spring comes. The world took note of this. A whole bunch of people raised their hands and said, this is silliness, and enacted regulations, there's that dirty word again, which reduced the use of DDT and other chemicals. They didn't rule them out entirely. And I'd like to note that part of the problem was poor use of these chemicals and indiscriminate use. If they're used properly and carefully, they still can be used. But they're really dangerous stuff. So, the hydrocarbons, the chlorinated hydrocarbons, one of them is termite protection. That also has been taken out of the market because people were spraying it on their crops. Later in my father's career, he was stationed on Paris Island, an island in South Carolina which is surrounded by swamps, right? As a facilities officer, he was in charge of basically everything that happened between, toilets to roofs to the swamp. As one day we were standing out looking at the swamp, swatting mosquitoes, and he said, I could get rid of all these mosquitoes, all these sand gnats. All we have to do is spray oil on the swamp. And he said, but that's a really bad idea. So the environmental disaster would have been horrible. People were enlightened in the 60s. We did not spray oil in the swamps. Later on in the 70s, the concern was that the propellants in our spray cans and the gas used in air conditioning, Freon, remember Freon, were damaging the ozone layer. And the ozone layer is really important for protecting us from the deleterious effects of the sun and heating of the earth. I might have that wrong, bear with me. So the world took notice and said, hey, we want to regulate Freon. We want to take certain Freons, certain chemicals, away from being used in air conditioning, and we have to find new ones. Well, once again, people said the world is going to end. We'll soon be sitting around, fanning ourselves and mopping our heads with towels as we sweat. I grew up in the South. I know about sweating. We would have 19th century living conditions. What happened? Smart people got to work. Last night I slept fine. It was air conditioned. It worked fine, and it's not destroying the environment. My car, I turned it on, and there's the cool air coming out of the vents. This stuff works. I haven't used, speaking of chemicals, I haven't used fertilizer on my lawn since 1988 when I killed all the grass because I put too much on, so I stopped. Instead of Drano to clean my slow tub drain out, I heeded the Sierra Club's suggestion to use vinegar and baking soda to clean that tub drain. Have you ever put vinegar and baking soda together? Well, think about it. If I had only used balsamic vinegar, the bathroom would have smelled like an Italian salad with foam coming out of the drain pipe. As it turns out, it was crazy. As it turns out, there was a plastic toy that nothing would have gotten out short of dynamite. More recently, though, the e-blast, our e-blast said, hey, you want to get rid of weeds? There's this vinegar, salt, and soap, Dawn solution. It works. It really works. I'm so happy, particularly the smaller weeds. But I'm sorry I draw the line one place, where fire ants are concerned. There is no quarter given to fire ants. They have no purpose. Does anybody know of a purpose for fire ants? No? Okay. Torture, yes. We could use them for torture. All right. Next subject is diet. I am a conscientious omnivore. How's that? I don't eat much meat, and I eat very little red meat. I love vegetables. I eat lots and lots of vegetables and fruits when I can. Of course, then you look at it, you find out, well, we'll get there. A plant-based diet, we know, has a lower greenhouse gas emissions and water impact on the environment, according to most analyses. So the more you shift your diet towards plant-based, the less impact you're going to have on the environment as a good steward of our environment. I try to purchase organic vegetables at the grocery store. I haven't made it to the farmer's market that often. Once not too terribly far from us, when my children were younger, there was a self-titled farmer's market near us. I like to go there, particularly because I always gave my kids fruit. I'd see them walking around with a banana. Where'd you get that? Oh, the guy gave it to me. Well, one day I asked the manager, where'd you get your fruit? Where'd you get your vegetables? A truck. Talk about knowing where you get your food. A truck. All right, on to recycling. In the 80s, and even before, recycling was seen as a way to reduce landfill impact and yes, recycle stuff. It's true that metal and glass can be recycled easily, and paper and cardboard can be returned to us as reincarnated boxes. But plastics, my friend, remember, which one was that? The Dustin Hoffman movie. The Graduate. Plastics, my son, 1960-something. Plastics are the bane of our existence. Most reports show that less than 10% of our plastic recyclables are actually recycled. And we've been shipping that big boat full of plastics to other countries, mostly Asia. But those countries have said, no more, can't do anything with it, slow down. I like to drink seltzer water. Sometimes bourbon sneaks in, but I like to drink seltzer water, and the bottles kept piling up in the house. So I said, maybe I'll get one of those handy dandy home seltzer makers. And I do have one, and there is zero waste there because the actual carbon dioxide container is refilled, well, zero waste, at least at my level, and I reuse the bottles to put the seltzer water in and sneak the bourbon in. My sister-in-law said that she'd figured the price of big box store seltzer against making seltzer at home, and she said it was about the same per liter, but I pointed out you got all the bottles. So I'm sticking with my seltzer spritzer in the kitchen. Recycling, you know, putting that stuff in the blue bin or the yellow bin or whichever one it is, it makes you feel good, but we really need to look at it from a more fundamental level. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Reducing just reduces the amount of stuff. You don't have to put your groceries, your vegetables, your produce in one of those plastic bags all the time. If you're getting bananas, grab the 3 bananas and put them in your cart. I'm not lecturing, I'm sorry, I'm talking to myself. You don't have to get the wrapped up vegetables if you can avoid it. One time I said, I don't want the vegetables that are in the styrofoam trays, so they took them out of the styrofoam trays and handed them to me. You can't win sometimes, but look for those vegetables that aren't wrapped up. Recycling takes energy, okay? Taking something from one form and making it into that form again takes energy. And we don't need to use more energy to make us feel virtuous. Reduce, reuse those plastic bags. Do something else with them besides letting them blow in the trees. I know we wouldn't do that, but reuse them for something. I even reuse Ziploc bags. Sometimes we got a real challenge in reducing. There's should be something coming up with the plastic bag that had spinach in it, and I didn't circle it, but if you see over there on the right, they're almost proud that you can't recycle it. It has a big X over the recycle symbol. You can't recycle plastic bags. Get the spinach that's not in a plastic bag. Last week we went out, my wife and I went out to eat in Fernandina Beach in the downtown area. The restaurant was beach casual, good food, and served our food in paper boxes. So they serve a double purpose. It's either what you're eating off of, or you can take it out, you know? So you don't have the styrofoam container to take your stuff out. Well, they served the food in paper boxes, and I guess that's really good, but then they just threw them away because you can't recycle in most places food recyclables. And all the condiments, if you look up there, I don't know how well it came out, all the condiments, including the salt. I asked for some salt, and they gave me a little plastic cup with a 1/4 cup of salt in it. I guess they were watching out for my blood pressure, but a little cup. And those were recyclables, not recyclables. You couldn't recycle that plastic. I was very frustrated. My wife and I, when we go out to eat, if we anticipate that we're going to have take-home, we try to bring our own take-home bag and little boxes. You can do that. They don't argue. They don't quibble. So do you want a styrofoam container? Hell no. Sorry. You know, we've traveled overseas, and other countries have different approaches to recycling and reusing stuff. In Germany, when you buy wine or beer or even juice, you pay a deposit. At least this was the way it was a few years ago. You pay a deposit on that bottle like we used to pay deposits on our glass bottles here in the United States. And then you redeem them at the grocery store, and you get credit for the nickel or dime or euros that you put on that deposit. I remember when I was a little kid picking up bottles on the side of the road to try to make money for the Boy Scout troop. On a Saturday night in Germany, there's a whole bunch of kids in the grocery store redeeming the bottles from the week so they can stock up for Saturday night. Now in France, which we also visited, they don't do that. They no longer have deposits on their bottles. They're all recyclable. So you've got your glass recyclables and your plastic recyclables and on. Different countries have different ways, as I said, they're approaching this problem. They do wrap your produce, not all of it, but you'll get produce that's in a plastic bag there, but they claim that their plastic bags are recyclable. So different countries have different approaches. Regulations have brought about a different response to the recycling and waste problem. They don't do carry-out coffee overseas. You don't see people with paper cups with coffee in them. And that's probably because of custom. You know, they're used to standing at the counter with their cafe, chatting. Why? Chatting with people, putting the cup down. It's actually a China cup and leaving. They don't walk out with a cup of coffee. People in Europe don't eat in their cars like we do. It's a thing. The question is, how do I reduce and where does my recycles? Wait, that's two questions. All right. You get my drift. Try to buy produce without wrapping on it. Bring your own bags when you can. Bring your own carry-out boxes when you can. And try not to use those light veggie bags unless you really need some at home. Now, my recycling began years ago when on a canoe trip with my wife, and we were not too long married, down the Perdido River, which is on the border between Florida and Alabama. It was a beautiful river. We made it an overnight trip. There was a little campsite. And on the second day, I started pulling aluminum cans from the sandy bottom of that gin-clear river. And it's a beautiful river, but it was full of aluminum cans. My lovely wife patiently kept paddling, and then she helped me load the large garbage bag of cans into the car. Little bits count, I guess. Does that redeem the fertilizer fiasco? Does it? Does it? I got one more coming up. I thought you'd like this just for fun. This is the lazy environmentalist. If you can't read that, can everybody see it okay? Crack a beer and don't do anything for the earth. I'm good. My last area I'd like to touch on is population. Coming up soon. Thanks, Crystal. Oh, that's beautiful. As you can see, I can't see it. In the past 60 years, the population of the Earth has nearly tripled. We're nearly 9 billion people now. I threw in the 1350 population, if it's in there for reference. I don't know when the plague happened. I don't know how they had census, but they, you know, numbers. We've always done numbers. The United Nations had days that were celebrating the 6 billionth, the 7 billionth, and the 8 billionth person to walk the earth or to be born. It was a celebration of overpopulation, in my opinion. I think we might be running out of space. Okay, reducing the population is not something we need to take up. But slowing the increase, capping it, would be a good thing. I remember an interview a few years ago where when we were, I think, approaching 7 billion people on Earth, or they were forecasting 8 billion, a person who worked for Forbes magazine, the capitalist tool, posited that increasing population was a good thing because then there'd be more people to buy stuff. Our consumer society. When pressed, though, he admitted there may be a limit to the number of people. You think? At any rate, there seems to be a slowdown in the increase of the population. When the astronauts on Apollo 8 circled the moon, they were the first people to circle the moon, to leave Earth. They were also the first to see Earthrise. And William Anders, an astronaut who passed away recently, he was 90-something years old, took this photo. It's titled Earthrise, as I said, and shows Earth from afar for the very first time. And retired General Anders, the fighter pilot and nuclear engineer, said this: "To me, it was strange. We'd come all the way to the moon, and what we'd really discovered was the Earth. Now, we are faced with the more challenging question: will we save the Earth?" You know, we're still faced with that question. The paradise that I played in 60 years ago may not exist, probably has been paved. And humankind has dramatically changed the face of the planet, and not always for the better. We are living now in the only paradise we will know, and we must take care of it. Let's get to work. Thank you.